Thank you for joining. Today we are, this is going to be our basically the fifth episode that we've done. Ron Butler is on board. I call him, or he's a self-proclaimed Jedi Master of lithium ion power or lithium power, depending on who you ask, right? He was also he was in the fire department, the Detroit Fire Department, as you've heard before from his stories with Scott for 30 years. So, I think he brings a very interesting level of detail to, lithium versus lithium ion. And actually from a fighting perspective, right? Obviously in a waste and recycling, we're dealing with this on a daily basis. And again, I'll get into a little bit just to start. Right now we're seeing the numbers of waste and recycling fires actually, the percentages have actually gone up. From April, May, and all the things that we are dealing with from a lithium ion perspective and coronavirus, and these basically the evolution or the transition from commercial to curbside tonnage. We're seeing more fires in transfer stations. I've actually looked at the numbers so far, and I'm up to date for May. We're at 11 fires so far in the first 14 days. But of those, 8 of them are in paper, plastic, or waste, right? So, I think, we've seen some massive ones. I'm sure you guys have all heard. So, the idea, I want to keep this interactive. If you guys would like to hear the first one that we did, or if you would like to hear the session that we held with Jim Emerson. Jim Emerson is one of the, he's a fire engineer. He's an electrical engineer. He's most importantly, he works for the insurance companies, one of the large reinsurers, and he does audits of facilities. So really understanding, if a dam has risk mitigation, the things that they can do. And obviously he writes a lot of waste and recycling, hazard material, rubber customers as well. So those episodes are earlier. You can find those on the Fire Rover page, but today I'm going to introduce Ron Butler again. And this is we did the basics again, that's online, but if, we're going to get into a little bit more of, how lithium ion battery really works, the differences, and then, how you fight these fires differently. So, Mr. Butler.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Far from a Jedi Master, I'm just trying to figure things out on a daily basis. Every day is an opportunity to learn. So we take advantage of that opportunity.
Very cool. So can you see my slide?
Yeah.
I'm going to be handling for you. Yeah. So just let me know if, when you want to switch, and I think we're ready to go.
Let's go.
You started?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm looking at the formatting. You have still have the formatting box open. Maybe that's what threw me off.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so that's what I was curious. Can you see? Let's try this one more time. Can everybody see the slide?
Yeah.
I think it's showing up for me. So there you go. Oh, sorry. I don't have the formatting on. I'm going to leave it this way so that I can work through the different slides if we need to.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for having me. Not 30 years quite yet at DFD, but I did 24. Best time of my life, and I miss it dearly. One of the things that we always begin any type of training intervention with is a quote from where I think are people tied into risk. And this is one from Carly Fiorina, and I think it's very apropos. You take the acceptable risk, you have to be prepared to face the consequences. So I think that is part and parcel of our discussions here. Something we include in all of our discussions is not being afraid, not being fearful, but understanding, having a greater awareness of risk so you can face it head on and make the right decisions to control that risk. Next slide, please.
All right.
So when we talked about last episode, we focused on fires in the battery life cycle. So if you look at or you envision the life cycle of a battery, starting with R&D and training, testing. Some people would even argue that it begins when you pull raw materials out of the ground. But for our purposes, something that's reasonable to everyone on this call, it starts with R&D and training. It moves around to all these stops that you see here ultimately winding up in discard or recycling and possibly reuse. We're seeing a lot of that right now. And in between all those stops is a logistics process, transport and storage, which is really where a lot of the failures take place. But we're focusing for these discussions on discard and recycling. Because of that, we need to understand some of the additional risk issues that people on this call face, regardless of how you interact with a battery. Next slide. Today, we're going to talk about the differences between lithium ion and lithium. And they are quite stark, and we need to make them clear to you so you can make better decisions about how you confront and control the risk. A secondary cell is rechargeable and is generally lithium ion. 2 words, lithium ion, recharge, secondary cell. Those are easy ways to remember this, versus a primary cell, which is non-rechargeable and is generally, for our discussions, a lithium battery. Now, this isn't always the case. There are some deviations from this norm, but for most intents and purposes, lithium-ion batteries are rechargeable, and lithium batteries or primary cells are not rechargeable. Next slide, please. Let's start with lithium-ion, or secondary, what we call a secondary battery. Of course, it is rechargeable, which means we can use it multiple times. Everyone has in front of them a laptop or a smartphone. Those are rechargeable and generally lithium-ion batteries. For most intents and purposes, they contain no lithium metal. That's very important to remember. There's no lithium metal associated with lithium-ion batteries. Next slide. And again, we're going to try to get through this as quickly as possible because we want to encourage questions. I think discussion is far better than a lecture. From
Absolutely agree. So yeah, if you have questions, I mean, feel free to send a comment, or feel free to ask, or just raise your hand.
From National Fire Protection Association's Fire Protection Research Foundation, lithium-ion batteries are considered Class A fires. That means they're no different than wood or any other common combustible we found in our environments. Next slide. And I'll come back to this so it becomes clearer. Lithium, on the other hand, are primary batteries, not rechargeable. One use, generally a very long use, does contain lithium metal, and this is for most intents and purposes. These become important things to understand as we move forward in this discussion. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so let me ask this question, right? I mean, so when you're looking at like a greeting card battery, is that considered a lithium battery versus lithium ion? And like, unless
That's a great example. Great example. If there were to be in the lithium family, there's other battery chemistries that are used for that now. But if they were to use a lithium family of batteries for that purpose, it would be a non-rechargeable lithium battery.
And are you seeing, so like the other chemistries that you talk about, right? I mean, we see in waste and recycling that basically all batteries are kind of being thrown into the same, into the same characterization. So you would say that's not the case, and each of them might have their own risks or positives, negatives.
Absolutely. If for example, if you were to have, I hate to call out company names, but a home supply store, one of the big ones, we know it. The type we're talking about, and they collect batteries. When they collect batteries, they allow almost any battery into that collection bin. And when that happens, their terminals touch. Batteries have been abused, dropped, and smashed. They are different. They're aging in different ways. That is a bad situation, and that's where the fires can start. For most intents and purposes, you can mix NiCad, any of the other chemistries, lithium ion together, and it's not a good mix. And that starts with collection, but it will wind up in the recycling process.
Okay, and you have a question from James Wagner. Ron, I suppose you'll get to the fire risk of each lithium, metal versus ion. And I think, again, I think the idea, like you were just getting into, makes sense, right? So like, you're basically putting all these different types of batteries together, right? Lead acid batteries are considered on their own. They're kind of their own supply chain, right? And I think from our perspective, from a waste and recycling perspective, we don't see the automotive OEM batteries, right? Really, what we're looking at from a different supply chain is the personal storage and and the electronics, right? So, but I mean, you make a good point. When you go to, and you didn't say it, but a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and you have a box, and they're basically allowing you to, put all your batteries in there. Is the fire risk coming from lithium ion, or is it coming from lithium, or is it coming from, alkaline, or whatever the other pieces are? Do you know?
It's very challenging to quantify that. The problem is it's tantamount to a toxic soup. Things will go south, and it's hard to tell which one started the fire. Of course, lithium and lithium ion are the being picked on right now, but other battery chemistries have problems, and maybe not to the same level and the same way that lithium family of batteries do. But it would be hard to determine how that fire started, what started that fire.
Understood. So I think, I mean, again, like it's the thermal runaway that makes it different. Is that the major factor, right? That once it gets hot enough, it starts to create its own basically fuel versus the others that don't necessarily do that. Is that a fair?
It's a very general approach, but I think that's fair. It's very general. I mean, I can make, I've been approached. We do a lot of work with the University of Texas and Underwriters Laboratories, NFPA, on battery fire research. And we've had companies approach us and say, our batteries don't burn. Aha, I can make your battery burn. So it's
Yeah,
it's it's very difficult to quantify.
right. And I think from our perspective, right, I mean, we're getting that toxic soup, right? I mean, from a waste and recycling specific perspective, I mean, we do with Fire Rover, we have some solutions that cover just a specific type of automotive OEM battery, right? The lithium ion battery that is rechargeable, and it's a very closed end supply chain, but there is risk there, right? So like that, it's I don't want to say it's easier for us to control when we're controlling a hazard material. Like we know what we're dealing with sometimes, right? I shouldn't say that all the time, because a lot of times, you don't necessarily know, or you have mislabeled chemicals and stuff like that. But I think from just the MRF and a transfer station perspective, I mean, we have to deal with all these hazards, and you can't have a different solution for everyone, because you really have to have a one size fits all solution, or plan for it.
Absolutely. Lithium primary batteries are treated as Class D per NFPA, and that gains importance in the next slide. We'll show you exactly why that has relevance.
That was a great cut in, right? Why is it important?
Yeah.
Anyways.
And I think it has. I usually, when I'm doing any type of training, I hate to read from PowerPoint slides. I think it's important that we understand the issues and we can talk to people. But I think in this case, it's extremely important that everyone takes some time and read NFPA's, National Fire Protection Association, statement on lithium and lithium ion. And I'll explain in about 30 seconds. If you go back to that slide.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. Give them a chance to read this. So what they're basically saying is the same fire suppression techniques, and I think this gets to James Wagner's question. The same fire suppression techniques that we would use for a Class D, which would be a lithium, should not be used on a lithium ion battery, which is Class A. Class D fires are in the fire classification system. There's 5 generic classifications. There's A, B, C, D, and K. A is common combustibles: paper, wood, plastics, and then we go to we won't water down the conversation by discussing B and C, but we'll go straight to D: combustible metals, which is what Class D fire is, and that's what a lithium battery presents to us, Class D. For that, we can move on to the next slide. We'll give you a little bit of information on how to address these. In order to keep the discussion simple, of course, there are exceptions to this, and I'll discuss a couple of exceptions in just a minute. But for most intents and purposes, when we're trying to suppress a Class A fire, we can use water or water-based fire suppressant. That changes if we want to suppress a Class D fire, which is what lithium batteries are. I know it can get confusing. Lithium ion versus lithium. That's why I thought it's so important that we make the distinction early on. There's a massive difference. And I'll give you an example of how we can get confused in just a moment. But let's go back to this for just a second. We cannot use water on lithium fires. Now, there are some exceptions. There are water-based fire suppressant additives out there that have shown some effectiveness on both. So it will allow us to potentially use a water-based fire suppressant for lithium battery fires. This goes back to what you said earlier, Ryan. We can't. It's not efficient or effective for us to design a separate, containment, storage, recycling process, and accompanying fire suppression for each type of battery chemistry. It just doesn't make sense. We have to have holistic processes. Because of that, we have to have a fire suppression methodology and fire suppressants or fire control technology that allow us to deal with both fires. So in a bin and a recycling facility, we might have a mix of lithium and lithium ion batteries. And because that's the case, we have to be able to control that fire with a common control method and suppressant.
So to ask the question, I mean, we typically use an encapsulator agent. Sometimes we'll use a foam. I mean, what would you suggest is the best way to go, right? I mean, and again, I understand that water's great if you can deluge it, right? But I mean, at the end of the day, most of the time we don't have as much water as you would need, for these types of solutions.
There are some promising additives out there. I can't name. I don't name companies by name, but there are some prominent encapsulating agents are one of them. And I think that might even be the best. We have to wait and see. But there's got to be real testing behind this. We can't just use it and say, hey, we've seen it works. A video shows it. There has to be real testing behind it. And to show that it's third-party confirmative and that the third-party tester has deemed this effective. Now, that being said, if a company wants to go ahead and give one of these suppressants a try, I've seen them. They seem to work just fine. But that's different than a test, and we have to be very clear about that.
Well, and I think that's a great question. So, so we do a ton of testing internally with Fire Rover, right? So, and again, we're agnostic on what we can use. I mean, so for each different application, we do have our standards that we use for waste and recycling when you're dealing with the what you call it, the toxic soup. But I guess, the question becomes, is NFPA, and I mean, I'm on the committee for hazardous material, like creating recommendations. So like, I mean, I kind of know the answer, but I guess I'd like to get your thoughts. Like, what do you think the industry catching up with the technology out there and the suppressant technology that's out there? I mean, of course, we all understand that everyone's pushing fluorine out of the equation, right, from an environmental perspective. So like, we've been pushed to find a solution early that gets rid of that one common effect, but we also have to make sure that it works, right? So like, again, I guess the two questions, right? One would be, how do you feel NFPA is keeping up with the code, and really helping drive the evolution in the industry, I think, is first. And then second, like, what are you seeing? I know there's been some laws or some rules that they're trying to bring down, from a segregation perspective. What do you see for specifically waste and recycling, but like based on any regulations that are coming through?
Well, let me take a shot at the first one. NFPA does really good work in this space. There's always a lag in the adoption of code standards relative to risk, and there's definitely going to be one here, especially as we consider the rate, the expected rate of growth of lithium battery technology over the next 5 years. There's no magic bullet to replace lithium ion. I know every day we all get articles. The next best thing for lithium ion is fireproof. Blah blah. Look, you have to prove it out. You have to supplant the queen. Lithium ion is queen for a long time, so it's going to be in our waste and recycling streams for a long time. And FBA, I think, is making headway on some of this, as are other organizations. It's not that the rules and standards aren't necessarily crystal clear right now. As long as we remember that they are living documents and always in a state of flux and transformation. Now, as far now, the second one. What was the second one, Ryan?
Well, so I know that there was the segregation, whether or not
Okay.
they're going to figure out, or whether or not municipalities are going towards the hazard material versus the electronic recycling designation. And I mean, yeah, I know there's been a few rules that you've told me about in the past that we're all kind of on our pins and needles, right? Because what's it going to do from a waste and recycling perspective? Um, I think that's way open in the air. But so if can you kind of get into the segregation rules that you're seeing coming down the pike?
Yeah. What I think we should probably spend one of these hours talking only about the authority having jurisdiction, the fire marshal, and coming codes and standards. It is going to impact every industry, not just waste and recycling, that deals with a battery. Part of the problem is when codes are developed. Let's take the International Fire Code. When IFC develops a code, it's a very deliberate process, and there are very well-meaning people that are involved in the process. Everyone has their own idea of how the finished standard should look, but everyone is generally pure of heart. What's going to happen, and I would refer everyone on this call to International Fire Codes F1818. So if you do a Google search, just for your own information, type in International Fire Code and F-18-18, and you'll get a better sense of what some of the coming code language could look like. Now, you also have to keep in mind that the code officials, like fire marshals, have a job to do, and they have a lot on their plate. So when they come to your facility, we have to swallow our pride and recognize that we're just a small sliver of all of their total responsibility. So they're going to refer to code language to guide them through how to deal with you. And sometimes, depending on the code official, they can take that code language extremely literally without deviation. So if the code language says, I'll buy a pot of gold, it means I'll buy a pot of gold, not I will buy a pot of gold-like substance. They're very clear that they will refer to the standard as it is written, because this is a space, certainly when we're dealing with lithium-ion batteries, in which the fire marshal is not well versed. To them, it's still considered new technology. Keeping in mind, again, that they have a ton of things on their plate, and they're trying to do the best job that they can do. They're trying to protect you and anyone that comes into your facility through the use and leveraging of standards, rules, and regulations. So I think as we move ahead, we have to better understand the codes. Once we understand the codes, we can map our unique organizations a better pathway forward. We have a clearer understanding of the things we need to do and some of the tools we might want to have in place to protect ourselves.
Well, yeah, and just to add to that, I think Jim Emerson and I, we did a combinational approach from a performance based. But I mean, to your point, it all comes down to the local jurisdiction. So, again, if you look at it, I mean, we've actually had our kind of language written in. I mean, everything in National Fire Protection, so like everything in their code, there is a performance-based exception for new technology.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those, and I think this is something that from a waste and recycling perspective needs to be made really really clear. Is that unfortunately the standards that are being set up will be set up based on generalities, right? They're not going to be based for waste and recycling. But unfortunately, what's going to happen is waste and recycling is going to be the recipient of whatever these rules are. So I know I spent a lot of time trying to, get that word out there that as an industry we need to come together I know we're talking about the problem, and we do have some great surveys and other things that are happening, but as an industry, we really need to make sure that we're on the cusp of this, because if not, I mean, if they come in a perfect example, where they say, okay, any manufacturer, any operator that's dealing with lithium ion batteries needs to have them completely, secured in a location that is 150 feet away from main building, right? Like, and again, I mean, you've heard these, right? So, I think it's one of those that we need to make sure that together as an industry, we're not getting thrown into an exception, where we need to now prove that performance-based solution that works, but needs to be proven to every local jurisdiction, right? And as just like anything else, there's some jurisdictions where they're very open and innovative, and there's some jurisdictions that they're very militaristic, right? Very like, follow the rules, it is what it is, gold is gold. So
Exactly, and a lot of times the reason for that is, paraphrasing, they could have been burned by some, by allowance that was made before, that they might not have made today, and that means they're going to change their behavior. Referencing that type of code language, if you could imagine, if a potential code would have passed, I won't mention the code. If the potential code would have passed, which it didn't, um, imagine four cubed piles of lithium ion batteries, 4 yards cubed, or 4 yards cubed. That's the extent of it. That's as big a pile as you can have. But each pile has to be separated by 200 feet in order to avoid propagation from one pile to another after batteries are burned. Could you imagine the space that's going to be required for that? That's an untenable expense for anyone to absorb. So I think what happens at the end of the day is if the industry comes together and looks at this as an opportunity to develop best practices. Best practices can inform really good standard making. So if the folks putting together the standard have nothing to go on, they're going to develop the most arbitrary, sometimes arbitrary, the most stringent rules that they could possibly come up with, because they have to. In all fairness to the folks on these code development committees. But if industry leads with a series of best practices that can often supersede what the code officials come up with, then that gives the code officials some cover, saying, hey, look what we've come up with. Is this acceptable? The code official looks at the rules and rulemaking and says, you know what, I'm going to allow this because this is technology that I'll accept and can potentially supersede any standard that I would have leveraged in this process anyway.
well,
But
yeah,
again,
that's a great. I mean, it's a great point. I mean, I sit on the committees, right? So I understand. It's like, when you're in there, you have 30 to 40 people who are kind of giving their opinions, right? And it's a lot of opinions, and there's a lot of work to do in a small amount of time. So, I think it's one of those that, when you're in there, like, you're not always heard, and it does take the a coordinated effort by the industry to really know what they're fighting for, which again, I mean, I think it's tough because there's so many things that the industries need to fight for, right? I mean, waste and recycling is getting hit by a lot of different angles a lot of different times. I mean, it's almost like the fire marshal. Yeah, they might have one MRF in a transfer station in their jurisdiction, but they also have thousands of homes and businesses and other things that they're dealing with. So again, I mean, I guess if I can be, I think the industry definitely needs more than just the.
Well, we already got one shot out, just for encapsulating agents.
Someone
No.
is someone speaking? All right, so Ron, with that, again, if you guys have questions, or if you guys have anything, if you have anything that we, would like to ask, let's keep that going. I mean, again, I'm going to go through what the plan is, and what we can do to try to protect ourselves from waste and recycling facility fires, right? So, and again, when I say waste and recycling, it's not just lithium ion batteries, right? It's not just waste, MRFs, and it's not just transfer stations. Even though I do see that we're seeing a significant amount of those, but hazard materials, rubber, organics, there's a lot of things that we recycle. We recycle chemicals, and so a lot of those are, um, I mean, like, call it that toxic soup, right? I mean, we are literally given every single thing to figure out how to reuse it, and instead of throwing it into a into a landfill. So really, I think, again, one of the things that Ron was speaking to is, like, there's the prevention side of this business, and really understanding what we're trying to prevent, and really making sure that we have fire plans, and we have all the different things that we have from a safety perspective. And like ISRI just put out best practices for from an NFPA perspective that was put together. Those are great, right? I mean, you have to plan. And honestly, I mean, I don't know if my belief is that um, safety is not competition, right? I mean, it's the Volvo approach, but the whole idea is that we should all be sharing best practices out there. I mean, nobody wants anyone hurt, and nobody wants anyone to, God forbid, pass away from, something that does happen from a hazard that is brought in. So again, that's really all focused on how do we prevent and run the best operation. But really, and then the other side of it is the professional response, which is, your fire department or your fire brigade. Really what I'm focused on, and Fire Rover's focused on, is internal response, and really figuring out how fast. We know that there are fires in our industry, right? I mean, like, there is no doubt in my mind that we are dealing with hazards that we don't truly understand. And I mean, you have Ronald Butler who's on here. I mean, he's a very smart guy. At the same time, it's like, you know he doesn't understand 100%, right, Ron? And again, I don't want to speak for you, but there's so many different risks and hazards out there, and our risks are not going away. And I think what you and I violently agree on is that we're only getting more, like, lithium and lithium ion batteries inside the waste stream. Is that a fair?
That's absolutely fair. If I'm afforded the opportunity to learn something every minute, I would. But daily is good, and we learn something new about this every day. It's a continuously changing and evolving life cycle. Now, the batteries are very unique. Um, what else causes fires in the back of a delivery truck on a highway? Really, what else? It serves
Oh,
as kindling for that type of thing. There's only one thing, for most intents and purposes, one thing, and it's batteries. And these are things that are great technology. I'm a huge fan of lithium ion. I'm a greenie, I'm sorry. But that's who I am. I want to see this stuff flourish. But in order for it to really flourish and to avoid problems downstream, we have to do some mitigation on the front end. And once we do that, and we can better control the environment, we can better influence things like rules and standards, and we can protect ourselves. We can clip underwriting costs. There's just a ton of things that the industry could benefit from doing really strong mitigation.
well, yeah, and I think, I mean, underwriting costs, right? And that's what Pam was talking about before. And I mean, I can tell you that, you know, I spend a ton of time, and I know, our company spends a ton of time working with insurance companies who, it's not that they don't want to leave the industry, but what they're seeing is that, and this is like a perfect example. Like, 5 years ago, the whole idea that the lithium ion battery, that there was a wave coming, right? Well, I saw it in 17 to 18. It was real bad, right? Like, so if we kind of look at the numbers, and again, if you follow any of my articles, I mean, 18 was when we saw some of these big numbers, massive, right? And the number of fires have, like, 18 and 19. This was really when the industry woke up. And the other thing was, the insurance companies woke up during this time, right? I mean, this is Nathan Bernard, who basically, these were actual claims data, and the claims data, these were like the real. This was the real claims data, and this was the real amount, and these were the numbers that I had been sharing. And the reason I show that, it was all really in that 18, and I can show those numbers. But even in, like, Japan, let me find that slide that I was just on. Even in Japan, like, their fires went from like 40 to 128, so they were up like 200%, in this year, right? And that's really where we started to see the personal storage and electronics really get into, to the level that they are. And again, no one wants to say. I mean, we've had fires forever in waste and recycling, right? Aerosol, hot works, paints, fireworks. I mean, all these other things that we've been dealing with. But when you start to get it in, that's really where we got hit. And this is what I was referring to. This is the actual claims data, and this was 16, 17, and 18. And 18 shredders, were up, and lithium ion battery claims. These are actual claims from insurance companies were up. So, again, both of these were because of this evolution, of lithium ion batteries. That again, that's my gut, right? Um, so, I really think, this is where our technology, and again, we're patented technology, was really accepted in the industry. And it's not that we're out there. Yes, we're here to protect our customers and our clients and to ensure they don't have fires. But the other thing is really working with the insurance companies to tell their actuarials and to let them, or actuarial, like, so that they understand that you can mitigate your risk, and to give people the confidence and the insurance companies to come back into the industry. And really, that's been the big difference. And I think we've seen it. If you look at a lot of the bigger guys, a lot of the large insurance companies are pulling out right now. So the AIGs of the world, they're not just pulling out of waste and recycling, they're pulling out of a lot of their really risk intensive portfolio. So, it's just something that we definitely have to deal with. Now, again, what we're trying to do is, we're trying to catch that fire within the first, the first incipient stages or pre-incipient stages. So looking at the the heat abnormalities in our customers. And we've evolved a lot. I mean, we started with our fire Rover Box, which a lot of people are familiar with, which is basically, it's a tank, 1,000-gallon tank. It has 97% of an encapsulator, or 3% of an encapsulator agent, 97% water. And if it's an outdoor application, we typically will have we have top grade thermal cameras or nozzles, and a 22-foot mast. Indoors, you're going to see these at a lot of waste and recycling facilities. This will be an indoor application where all you're going to see is 40-foot ceiling, two cameras and a nozzle, right? And again, I think the evolution of what we've done has really, this is one of the things that you were talking about, Ron, where it's like, we do thermal only applications where there's a sprinkler system, because again, the sprinkler systems are required by code. But we have a number of our facilities where the performance-based application in the jurisdiction has allowed us to be the only sprinkler system for these sites. So we actually just got what we just finished a MRF in Michigan, that we have a variance where they're using a fire rover system in lieu of a sprinkler system. And again, if we go back to what Jim was saying before, you need to ensure that the sprinkler systems, if you have them from a combinational approach, you need to have them basically focused on your steel beams, right? Because once the steel beams bend, then your building really at that point is a total loss, or theoretically a total loss, because you lose the strength in the structure. So again, the idea for us, what we did for that facility and a number of other facilities now, is that we're utilizing our system. It shoots for 6 to 12 minutes on a normal tank. So what we've changed with ours is it's unlimited, because when the fire department gets on scene, we've now treated that fire, and then we have a manifold that comes off where the fire department can hook to that manifold, and we can continuously spray, and again, using our human agents, that are remotely located to spray. I think, the other thing that we're working on now, which is a lot of these larger facilities. So, if you think paper facilities, outdoor large applications, we're doing so, and waste to energy especially, we're doing the fire rover glue system, which is basically, think fire rover outside of the box, and the box being our fire rover containers. And the idea is that, we're able to do a targeted deluge system of water only, or of water and a part of an encapsulator or a foam agent if it's required. But what we can do is, we're basically, if you look at a waste to energy facility, we'll have 8 to 10 cameras, we'll have 5 nozzles, and the minute we see a fire, we're literally spraying it for as long as needed until the fire has been under control. But again, we're not waiting for that radiant heat to hit a 30-foot ceiling, or in a waste to energy facility, a 100-foot ceiling, to where that temperature is already at a point where there's the building has been compromised. So I don't know if anyone wants to see specific videos. Happy to show them if anyone has specific questions, or about the system. But I mean, I can kind of walk through a few of these if you guys want to see them. But this is the Fire Rover outdoor system shooting with, you know, it's a, you're going to see thermal cameras and a nozzle. And I mean, this will shoot, you know, if it's on a mast unit, it'll shoot about 140 to 150 effective feet. You know, and what's nice is, I mean, this will be in a transfer station. I mean, these are fires that we are literally saving on a daily basis. And the fear that I have is that the fires are actually going up every year, and we have these in 150 locations. So we now know that there's less fires that are occurring in the facilities that we're protecting. And again, that's not a sales pitch. That's a, you know, all we have knowledge and we have a front line on, you know, a front row seat on a lot of these fires. And, you know, again, we're learning as we go, right? I mean, you know, 5 years ago, we'd get a fire and, you know, we didn't know specifically. I mean, we knew the solution would work, but at the same time, you know, as we've fought transfer station fires and MRF fires and chemical fires and, you know, rubber fires, and now, I mean, we're literally 200 fires over the last 12 months, right? And it's probably more than that at this point, but, you know, we've seen in the last week alone 3 to 4 fires that we've put out at our facility, like at our customers' facilities. So some of those are shared, some of those aren't, but, you know, it's definitely something that, you know, we know our solution is working over the traditional requirements. You know, these are lithium ion batteries, specifically explosions. I'm sure you appreciate these, right, Ron? There you go. See that thing just go up?
Yep.
I'll play it again. So Paul just asked a question, why is this applicable to lithium ion battery fires? It was just explained to avoid water. So what we're using is an encapsulator agent. So what this encapsulator agent does, it puts reverse polarity around the water molecule. So it actually doesn't steam off the way water would. And again, the way that you need to deal with a lithium ion battery is you need to soak it to a point where it's, you know, where if you think of a foam is going to devoid it of oxygen, but because it creates its own oxygen, you have to really soak it. So this is one of the big things that we're learning with our transfer stations and MRF fires. So the idea is that, you know, you shouldn't necessarily go in and try to pull one of these fires, try to use a loader and try to pull all this material out to a you know, out and expose it to oxygen. What you need to be doing is pre-wetting it, waiting till it's been pre-wet. And again, the encapsulator agent, it's a water molecule, but it's treated not as water. So I mean, that's a great question, Paul.
I think it might pay a dividend to readdress Paul's concern, because I think that's a very important issue to come back to. The difference between lithium and lithium ion can be complex to people who don't live it every day. To us, it's easy. We understand it. We know the differences right away. To someone like Paul, in all fairness, it's incumbent upon us to make sure it's explained clearly. Lithium, again, and I try to do it succinctly, is a very difficult issue to address in a couple of slides, but let me try to give it another shot. Lithium ion and lithium are different, and as long as we start with that premise, we're good. If you go into that family store, the home improvement store, they're going to market everything as lithium, and that's not the case. Most of the stuff they have in their facility is lithium ion. It's rechargeable. So it's very difficult for a lay people to begin to quantify the difference and apply it to their lives. In this case, lithium ion is a battery that's rechargeable. I can use water on. Lithium, provided that they're separated, I generally would not use water on lithium because it's a Class D reactionary metal, combustible metal. However, because Ryan pointed out that we can't have processes and systems to address them separately, we have to come up with processes and systems to address them when they're all batched together. Lithium, lithium ion, all kinds of other chemistries are together, and we haven't been able to separate them. There's a fire. What can we use that will address the concerns of suppressing a lithium ion battery fire, but also address the concern of addressing a lithium battery fire. And that's when you can potentially use a water-based agent that will suffice for both. An encapsulator agent has been shown to potentially meet that threshold. But we, just throwing, if I had a huge batch full of lithium batteries, I would not default to just water. I could default to maybe something like an encapsulator agent, which changes the suppression properties of that water. It's a very complex and sometimes difficult. I do an hour class just on that.
And again,
So,
I think, I mean, and I love every question, right? I don't know, do you see what Paul's asking again? And I've gotten a couple that have come to me specifically. And again, I think the answer is this, right? We know, and we've had the experience that the encapsulator agent works well. And again, I mean, it's F500 from, HCT, right? So that's what we use specifically. And again, we're agnostic on what we use, the same way Ron's being very political because he's not going to, as you shouldn't, right? And again, I don't expect you to do that. To push any specific product in his consulting, right? So again, from our perspective, we can use different types of products, and we do use a ton of different types of products, but overall, we default, especially in a MRF facility, to the encapsulator agent. And the reason it works well is that it has water properties, but it doesn't, or it has water properties, but it's not treated as water in metal fires, right? The Class D fires. So, we find that it works. Now, again, has it been approved by NFPA? Has it been approved by FM? Has it been approved by UL? Those are questions that, again, to us, that's a lot of politics per se. We've had a lot of luck with it, right? And again, when I say that, I mean, we've done a ton of testing, as you saw from our facility as well. So, like Ron, I don't expect you to back any specific type. And with that being said, it's also fluorine free, which is helpful from our perspective. And there's very little cleanup. So, I mean, again, I think that's a question for, I mean, I'm sure Ron Lowry, like, I get it. There's HCT people on the phone. If you want to answer those questions, I mean, I'm happy to have them answer those specifically when it happens.
Hey, Ryan, this is George Kirshner. Can I weigh in here?
Sure.
Okay. Hey, Ron, again, this is George Kirshner with PRVA. So, Ron, what might help a little bit in explaining the difference between lithium ion and lithium metals, listening to your presentation, which is excellent as usual, you distinguish between lithium ion and lithium batteries. What we really should be saying is lithium ion and lithium metal batteries. And you and I are very close to this issue, and we both know when you say lithium batteries, you mean lithium metal.
Yeah.
So again, there's that clear distinction between lithium ion and lithium metal batteries. So again, those are the two chemistries that we're dealing with here. So just keep that in mind. And maybe to Paul's point and back to Ryan's point is that, when you've got a fire involving, recyclable materials and you think there's a lithium ion battery and maybe there's some lithium metal batteries in there and you're concerned about using water, the volume of lithium metal batteries in those fires at those recycling facilities is extremely small. You're not going to have a half a pound of lithium metal batteries sitting at a municipal waste, facility. So water is going to work just fine on a very small quantity of lithium metal batteries. The amount of lithium metal batteries in the AA and AAA and CR123A battery is extremely small, less than a half a gram in the CR123s and less than a gram for the AA's. So if there's a battery involving a lithium metal battery, AA battery, the metal burns up very quickly. And then you just got a flammable organic solvent to deal with. So the water is going to work just fine on those small quantities of lithium metal batteries. You don't want to walk into a lithium metal battery factory and be squirting water all over the place when there's a fire there. Absolutely not. But in small quantities, water and lots of it is still going to be effective with lithium metal. Thanks.
Great point, George. I absolutely agree. We just don't find lithium metal and I think that is an important clarification to make. We try to design to speak to folks who don't necessarily understand some of these issues, but that is a good way of approaching that. And using water for small amounts of lithium is not an issue. There was a question
Jill?
uh, Jill Morris, I think is a really interesting question about the steps and tips that are needed to be included in SOPs. That's another uh, hour that we might take separately to discuss SOPs. When we begin to discuss standard operating procedures and emergency response procedures, they can become very detailed, and you quickly get into the weeds. So it's to do it at a high level really doesn't do you any good. Maybe we should think about taking some time to delve into those issues in a deeper way.
Well, yeah, and Jill, just to let you know, I mean, we do have the combinational approach, but I think it is the start of your SOPs, right? And I think, there's other specific, I think creating specific waste and recycling facility best practices, depending on what you're looking to do. I know ISRI has created, they actually have a version, and I believe Swana has a version. So again, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of people out there that are willing to share this. If you want to see the combinational approach, I can definitely share it with you. So send me an email after. This was developed by myself and Jim Emerson. But again, it really just depends on what you're looking and how specific you're looking to get, depending on what what your risk is. From Martin, I think you're saying in the future parking lots where there will be many cars using this kind of batteries, or their lots protected by sprinkler systems, it could be a problem. So I think what you're saying, and again, correct us if we're wrong, you're saying when we start to have a lot of batteries in an area. And again, like, let's understand, right? There's MRFs and there's transfer stations. There's also electronic recycling where we do get, I have pictures and I have some locations that I've been to, as we can all imagine, where they're doing really all battery recycling, and there's some really high risk there, right? You're going to see piles of old computers and piles of old electronics, and every single thing that you've ever could imagine has to go somewhere. So we do see this, and yes, in a MRF, when we're saying, hey, there's a small amount of metal and here's what you're dealing with. Well, when there's a lot of these facilities where you're dealing with it on a larger scale, and the solution is it's a little bit different, and you're not gonna pull our cameras too far back, right? You're gonna keep it close. You're gonna handle those high hazard areas in a different way. So I definitely think there's a lot of solutions for it, but for my, I don't know. Do you want to speak to that, Ron? Martin's
There are
question.
solutions, keeping in mind that some of the SOPs offered are very high level. Each company or organization is going to have to decide, how deeply they want to dig, and who's going to push that ultimately is who they're dealing with as an authority having jurisdiction, who the insurance company is, who the fire marshal is. What are their expectations? That will help you determine the depth to which your SOPs or ERPs go. And very quickly, before we go, I want to encourage everyone to get involved in something. Try to get on an NFPA development committee. Join an industry advocacy group like PRBA. They do really, really good work for advocating on behalf of their clients. And then people like Senator Angus King out of Maine, he's pushing lithium-ion battery recycling bill. I think it's still in committee now, where they're really trying to get a hold of some of these problems. Maybe reach out to his office and encourage, offer support, and offer to participate. That's all I have.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it, and we're getting a lot of private messages thanking us for time and others and offers. So I appreciate all those. Listen, you never want to do a webinar that nobody wants to listen to. So I appreciate hearing that, and it's definitely appreciated. If you have any questions, let us know. Happy to answer on an email, or if you want to jump on a phone call with myself or with Ron, or let me know. I'm going to have this recording available on our Fire Rover YouTube page. So it's youtube.com/Fire Rover. I'll share it I'll share the link here. So, if you want to watch it after, or if you were signed up on LinkedIn, or if you were signed up on any of our others. And again, if you have ideas for the future of things that you guys want to learn about, happy to do so. This was the result of, you know, a lot of questions that we had that we wanted to get in what was the real difference between lithium and lithium ion. So I think, you know, we can definitely get into a little bit more detail on other topics, but, you know, it's it's always hard to make everybody happy, right? So that's all I ask, is not to make it too specific. Okay, well, Ron, I appreciate it. Thank you for joining, and let's, you know, unless there's any more questions, we can jump off.
Just a quick one, Ryan. My information, if anyone wants to reach out to me, is at the end of this presentation. Feel free to give me a call. I'm pretty much known as a nerd about this stuff, so I love to talk about it.
Well, yeah, and I think that's really the idea, right? I mean, I think, you know, we're all here to help, you know, drive safety and, you know, for this specific type of risk, right? So again, yes, you know, who doesn't want to sell fire rovers? But at the end of the day, I mean, you know, for all the things that we do, you know, we're doing this more as passion, right? I mean, it's how do we really help the industry? So, you know, again, I hope all this data has been working for everybody. And if you want, I don't know why, for some reason I don't have your email on these, but I will I'll
Should be
send
all
it
the way
out
at the
as
end.
well.
Should be all the way at the very end.
Yeah, that slide got messed up. Not
Oh, okay.
sorry. So, all right,
Well,
but
just give me
I'll
just I can give it to over right now as Ron at ESSPI.com. RON at ESSPI.com.
perfect. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks, Ron, as always, and we'll talk about the future if you know what makes sense once we get some feedback.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining.